I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present.
I guess the challenging years are the years where we kind of seem to learn and grow as winemakers the most. Even though I'd take a beautiful, easy vintage any year, they're not going to come every year.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. When we speak about the Yarra Valley region of Victoria, the name Yarra Yering inevitably comes up. So too does the name Sarah Crowe. Sarah is a winemaker at the very top of her game, although we've been saying that for many years now. With one foot in the vineyard and the other in the barrel room, Sarah is making some of the most important, highly awarded and talked about wines of Australia. Hi Sarah, thanks for joining me.
Hi Shanteh, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for making the time, especially at a very busy time of your life at the moment. Crowe, I see you grew up in Wollongong. That's where I went to high school. Where exactly was your stomping ground?
I grew up in Fig Tree and went to Fig Tree High. So, yeah.
Just around the corner. Amazing.
I know. Isn't that funny?
I was at Wollongong High School of the Performing Arts, and everyone just associates if you're from anywhere near Wollongong, it's just Wollongong. But I didn't know that that's where you were from. It's amazing.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, no, I grew up there my whole life, born in Wollongong Hospital, but there's no grapevines in the Illawarra, so so I had to head to the Hunter Valley.
Definitely. I remember the first time I heard that Heathcote was a wine region, and I actually thought it was just a little bit north, and I was so excited, but not so much.
I get so confused sometimes now. I live in Victoria and there's towns with the same names in New South Wales, and people will talk about a town and I'm like, really? Is that there? And then I realise it's, completely different state.
So we need to hear a little bit about how you found your way into winemaking, Sarah.
So I guess it was a little bit of an accident in that I loved being outdoors, and when I left Fig Tree High, I went and did an urban horticulture course, I guess it was called, from memory now. It was so long ago, and I used to work in garden centres, selling plants and things. And after I'd been overseas and spent all my money, I decided to have a go in a vineyard because I assumed it was, leaves and dirt, and that's what I'd been working on, so that it wasn't going to be too far removed. So I started working in the vineyard at first.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. When you were working at your plant store, were you thinking that you wanted to do kind of like outdoor landscaping, or what was your thoughts before you kind of found that you were in a vineyard and that suited you?
It was mostly for the home gardener, the kind of garden centres I worked in. And then I actually was working on an established tree farm up in the Southern Highlands for a bit as well. And there was some propagation and all that kind of thing there. And I guess that was probably one step closer to an open paddock, I guess. And yeah, I had been overseas, and that was when I saw my first vineyard, and I thought, maybe I can work in a vineyard back home. So I guess it was travelling and starting to, you go searching for yourself when you travel overseas. I turned 23 in Istanbul. And just, had spent all my money. Well, was spending all my money, but quit my job and just bought a one-way ticket to Istanbul, and didn't really know what I was going to do when I came home. I think I kind of found that inspiration in the south of France a few months later.
It sounds like the kind of Aussie thing that we do, where we, when we decide to go overseas, we want to do a big trip because it is so expensive to get out of Australia and get to Europe. So we kind of want to do as much as we can. How long were you actually travelling for, and where was the first vineyard? You said it's south of France, but whereabouts in particular?
We all did that. Maybe it was a Wollongong thing. We all kind of packed up our lives, and I put all of my belongings in my grandparents' garage, sold my car, and had a friend who was teaching English in Istanbul, so that was why we went there as the first point of call. But we travelled through the Middle East, so Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and then back to Asia, so Thailand. There was another friend working there. And then I was travelling with my sister, and she was coming home, and she ran out of money. And then I met up with another friend, and we did Laos, and then went to the UK, to London, and then that's when we went to France. Drove down into Spain and back, and then to America. But when I say the south of France, I don't know exactly where it was, but we'd pull up and eat a baguette with some jam and just kind of like look over the landscape wherever we were. And I was like, wow, these vineyards are really pretty, because it was autumn time, and so they had some beautiful autumn colours about them. And so I think that's why it caught my eye. And there was a lot of vineyards, so lots of driving and lots of looking at beautiful vineyards. I think was how it happened. Yeah.
Okay, and so then you decided to come home, which, yes, like you said, you run out of money eventually and then think, oh, God, what am I going to do now? So when you came home, what was your next step after that?
So I didn't get into grapevines straight away. That's when I went to uni, actually. So Wollongong Uni, I was doing a Bachelor of Arts in English history and was loving that. So then was a mature age student even. But after a little while thought, what do I do with this degree at the end? Like, living on the beach and riding a bike to uni, and it was also nice. But I started to think about long-term what it would mean. And an old friend rang me. He needed a hand on this established tree farm for a little bit. So I went part-time and then was working full-time there, and then that was kind of coming to a close. So I was kind of forced to make a decision. Do I go back to doing this arts degree? And I was, I called one of my sisters going, I think this business is wrapping up. And she said, didn't you want to work in a vineyard? That's what you said when you came home. I don't know anything about grapevines. And she said, and she worked in a bottle shop at the time, part-time. And she said, why don't you call Brokenwood? I hear they're really nice. And so I did. Yeah. She said, there's the guy, Ian Riggs, the winemaker, like I heard he answers the phone and everything. So when I called Riggs, he didn't answer, but I met him not too many weeks later.
Amazing. I can't believe that. That's so happenstance, the fact that she was working in a bottle shop and then just kind of was like, and also to remind you, remember when you said you wanted to do something? That's amazing. So you called Brokenwood, you popped your head around, I imagine, and where did you start at Brokenwood?
So when I called them that first time, I said, hi, I'm a horticulturalist and I'd like to work in your vineyard. And the lovely Rebecca said, look, I'll just give you KB's mobile, he's our vineyard manager, and give him a call. So I did that and spoke to the famous Keith Barry, and he said, I've got about 5 weeks pruning work. Why don't you come on up? And so that's kind of how it happened. And so I left the other job. I called him a few days later. Is there a caravan park I can stay in? And he said, there's a bunkhouse here above the office. You can just stay here. And I'm thinking, who are these people? Why are they all so friendly and accommodating? And this is really weird. And, now I know that most people in this industry are like this. And so I drove, a week later, my dad drove me a map of how to get to the Hunter Valley from Wollongong. And it was the longest route he could have taken me. But anyway, thanks, Dad. It got quicker over the years. And, I drove on up on a Monday and, started working in the vineyard there with KB.
Incredible. I mean, welcome to rural hospitality, I suppose. But I like the fact that you said it was a bit weird, because you would have a bit of alarm bells going like, why are they just letting me stay there? Like, what's
So they lure me there and lock me in a cupboard.
Is it a cult?
Yes. Well, it is a cult. I know that now. But.
The best kind. So you end up staying in the Hunter for 12 years, was it?
Yeah, yep, that's right.
Amazing. And when was all your time spent in the vineyard, or how did that kind of come about that you end up kind of staying in that one place for 12 years?
So I worked in the vineyard it was a bit over 6 months. And by this time I was sharing a house with Keith Barry's daughter, Katrina, who's now the vineyard manager there. She's taken over from her father's role. And she said to me, you should go and work at vintage in the winery, because we won't have much work once we've finished picking. And suggested I go and talk to Jim Chatto, who I believe you've done over the glass with recently. Yeah, I should go and work down there. So I got Jim's number and I went and had a meeting with him, and he gave me my first vintage job. So I worked down there at First Creek for 3 months. And they did offer me a full-time job, but the money was so bad, I decided to go back to Brokenwood and wing it as a casual for a little bit. So, but when I went back to Brokenwood, we were waiting for pruning, but also PJ needed a hand in the winery. Someone was heading back to Adelaide Uni to finish their degree. And so I went into the winery there for 6 weeks, because their vintage is so extended with all the regions they source fruit from. And then when that person came back, I said to PJ, does this mean I have to go back to the vineyard now? And he said, not if you don't want to. And about a year or two after that, he made me his assistant. So, yeah.
What a legend. So great.
Yep.
I love it. And then, look, eventually you moved to the Yarra Valley. Can you tell me a bit about what that move was like from the, iconic Hunter Valley, kind of more moderate climate, and then deciding to move down to the Yarra Valley? What was your thought process on that?
When I was at Brokenwood, I had been looking after their Beechworth intake for a number of years. So I would come to northeast Victoria for a month or so each year. So the idea of being in Victoria wasn't too foreign, but I had just started to think about what my next move might be and where I wanted to make wine if it wasn't going to be in the Hunter. And a few months later, the job was advertised, and I phoned Reid Boswood, who's our managing director and the winemaker at Kaysler, and who I had met through friends in the Hunter at some, seminar function, something along the way. And we had a good chat, and he said, I'd like it if you applied. And so I did. And then when they offered me the job, I guess accepting it was easy. Accepting the role at Yarra Yering was very easy. Deciding to leave the Hunter Valley was quite hard. They were like my second family, and still are. So, I'm still very close with all those people.
Yeah, and you've kept really great ties with them, and you still pop up to the Hunter show when you can, when the world allows you to.
Yes.
Which is amazing. Talk us through just a little bit about the differences between making wine in the Hunter and making wine in the Yarra Valley.
Yeah, I guess both regions produce, medium weighted wines. So I guess on average, the alcohol levels are fairly similar, but the ripening down here happens much more slowly. So in the Hunter, the nighttime temperatures are warmer, etc., and the grapes keep kind of metabolising overnight, and vintage happens really early in January now up there, whereas here, just those cooler nights generally kind of prolong that ripening period. And so we have more natural acid retention because of those cooler nights. And because the warmth and the sun, I guess, isn't quite as severe, we seem to maintain or get these quite thick skins across the varieties, which is why bunches and the use of bunches and whole bunch ferment here is so kind of popular, is that we tend to, the chemistry of the fruit here means that the integrity of those berries seems to last often throughout the ferment. So it just works really well here, and it's a little bit harder when your skins are starting to break down. So yeah, that whole bunchy characteristic and technique is quite a Yarra Valley thing, just because of the climate.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell us a little bit about the background and the history of Yarra Yering?
Yeah, so it was there was a Yarra Valley wine region back from about the 1880s, I think it was, up until about 1923. And all the grapevines were kind of returned to pasture. It's a little bit hazy. Some people say economic downturn. I guess there'd been war. Vineyards weren't quite as important to people. And so there wasn't any commercial wine made here from, I think 1923 was the last vintage. And then Yarra Yering's founder, Dr. Bailey Carradus, came along and planted grapevines here at Yarra Yering in 1969. And that was the forefront of modern day Yarra Valley. So Reg Egan also planted some vines in 69. But through that 69 to about 75, a lot of the famous vineyards were planted, like Mount Mary, Seville Estate, Yeringberg was replanted. So yeah, it was really, he was at the front of this kind of modern Yarra Valley establishment. And yeah, an interesting fellow from all accounts, Dr. Carradus. So he was a plant botanist. He wasn't a medical doctor. And so I guess he had a really good understanding of plants and the importance of their site. And I think, the single most important thing he did was choose this site here on this gentle north-facing slope in the foothills of the Warramate Hills. It's pretty beautiful.
So I hadn't actually been down there, but I have heard it's absolutely stunning. I think it's great that you talked a little bit about that kind of that kind of vine pool scheme that happened, and because I think that kind of dormancy that happened over that time was it's a big part of the story of the Yarra Valley, I think, and looking at some of those original replantings that were so important to develop the region. Let's talk a little bit about dry number 1 and 2 and the importance of these wines to the Yarra Yering offerings.
Yeah, they were the first 2 wines made. So our first vintage was 1973, so there was no commercial wine made in the Yarra for 50 years, from 23 to 73. And yeah, so these were the first commercial wines made in a really long time. And so dry red wine number 1 came off block number 1, and dry red wine number 2 came off block number 2. And so block number 1 has Cabernet and Merlot planted in it, and block number 2 has Shiraz and a little bit of Merlot and Marsanne. And so the 2 wines, the naming, it's a very strange way to name the wines, but I'm used to it now. But they connect those blends in the first kind of 25 years anyway. They connected the blends back to the blocks in the vineyard, which I think is really nice. And then the varieties in those blends, as the vineyard plantings expanded, they've grown quite a bit. So the dry red number 1 is our Bordeaux-inspired blend, and the dry red wine number 2 is our Rhone-inspired blend. Amazing.
I had some Yarra Valley Cabernet the other day, and I was at home, and it was one of those experiences where, you know, like you kind of want to swear and you get goosebumps and you're like, holy shit, this is good. And I think these days, you know, a lot of people are aware that there's some fantastic Chardonnay and there's some fantastic Pinot that we see in the Yarra Valley. But I always harp on about how important it is to really try these style of wines and connect that story of where the Yarra Valley's come from. Do you drink these type of wines a lot yourself?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you're right, the reputation of the Yarra Valley was built on the back of these Cabernet-dominant blends. And, you know, I guess mapping them out and the establishment kind of helps you map out the Yarra Valley a little bit as well. And, you know, the Yarra is quite a diverse region in relation to kind of elevation and aspect. And it just kind of, if you think about the Yarra, there's such a diverse offering because the landscape is so diverse. But yeah, it was really, the reputation was built on the back of these, you know, clarets.
And still today, such incredible wines. In the Australian landscape of wine, how would you describe the wines that you make?
I guess what I'm trying to make is the wines that have incredible fruit purity that show their environment more than their winemaker. So I really want to be making wines that are quite detailed but almost a little bit transparent, I suppose, where you sense the vineyard and the place more than you do the hand of the winemaker.
I agree with that, but I really wanted to hear what you had to say about that. It makes a lot of sense, I think, when I was reading a little bit more about the history, to connect you with being at the head of Yarra Yering, with your interest in horticulture and where you've come from, and then also with Bailey Caritas and his kind of botanist inspiration, that what happens in the vineyard and really, you know, from the ground up is so important. And I think that you really do see those in the wines, but really interesting to hear you say it too. In 2021, that was a year full of recognition for your hard work, being named Winery of the Year for the Real Review and Halliday Wine Companion. On top of that, Gourmet Traveller Winemaker of the Year, and then a million bajillion awards for the wines that you make. How does acknowledgements like that affect your life?
Well, they make they certainly put recording podcasts on my calendar, which is also a reflection of, you know, COVID, I guess. It's harder for us to travel and sit in a room together. Yeah, look, it was an incredible year for me personally and for the brand last year. I guess what it's meaning is that also the wines are getting harder for people to access, which is, I guess, a nice problem for us to have as a brand. Yeah, and I don't know, I guess probably it might be bringing more scrutiny to the wines that come after the 2019 vintage. You know, people might be paying more attention to those at the same time, but, you know, it's just been such a nice recognition for the whole team and for everyone's hard work, because, like, I'm sitting here talking to you and I'm watching the boys roll up nets for the block that we're picking tomorrow, and it's hot out there. You know, it's 31 degrees and they've been picking, and it's, even though I get to talk to these awards and about the wines, you know, there's a small team, but there's a team of people behind me that help make it all happen. So I think it was a really nice year for everybody who works here or who has come through and felt like they had a hand in those wines at the same time.
And you can blame me later when they ask why you got to sit in the air conditioning during the podcast and weren't out there.
It's work.
So is that where the Warramate, we were talking about accessibility to wines, and even though it's a wonderful thing that, you know, certain maybe on-premise have to have allocations of wine, but at the same time you want everyone to be able to experience wines and not have to wait years to get on a wait list for them. Is that where Warramate label came in, or tell me a bit about that label?
Yeah, that's a vineyard that is the neighbouring vineyard further up the hill. So it kind of goes Yarra Yering vineyard, Warramate vineyard, Coldstream Hills vineyard. And it was planted, Dr. Carradus planted here in 1969. The churches who lived up there went, that's a nice idea. So they planted the following year in 1970. And then the son had taken over, and he is a local GP, and he was just too busy. And so he called us and said, I'm going to sell, are you interested? And we went, yep, for sure, because it's similar varieties, the same hill, dry grown. So the philosophies were all very much the same, and some really beautiful wine comes off that vineyard. So it was a bit of a no-brainer at the time to buy it, and really we just took, a couple of panels out of the fence and drove the tractors in, and we were away. So that happened in 2011. And those vineyards, or those wines off that vineyard, I do make in a more accessible way. So I use more bunches, really looking for some fragrance and a bit more softness, so less new oak in those wines. But I am in a bit of a similar situation with those as well, because it's not a very big vineyard either. So whilst the Warramate wines are more accessible, on the palate earlier and price-wise, there's still not an endless supply of those wines either. So, it's a similar problem that we have up there as well.
Well, you just can't lay around waiting for wines to fall in your lap from Yarra Yering. You've just got to get out there when they're released and buy them, which is, I think, the answer to this problem.
It's true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is a bit of a tough question, so I hope you can forgive me. But talking about strengths and weaknesses, what do you think your strengths are as a winemaker, and what are some of your weaknesses? And now you can answer that in any way you feel fit.
Yeah, okay. I guess, I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness, but I am probably my own worst critic. So I guess whenever I'm looking at wine batches and blends, is that the best it could be? Is there something I should have done differently? If I had my time again, what might I have changed? So, and that's an ongoing, the beautiful thing about wine is that it changes and evolves. And so that is a bit of an ongoing internal dialogue that I have. I think my strength probably, particularly because we only make wine off the vineyard that we own and farm ourselves, and having such proximity to the vineyard and my horticultural background, and even my degree that I did part-time whilst working at Brokenwood full-time is a Bachelor of Applied Science in Viticulture over the wine science degree. And so I think my strength is that understanding of the vineyard that I have, but all my practical experience, probably 98% of my practical experience has actually been in the winery. And so I think having that connection to the vineyard and the ability to look and understand the fruit and then adapt what we do in the winery to kind of suit the season is probably my strength.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that's really important to me as a manager is to try and bring the whole team along for the ride. So making sure that everybody feels safe, respected and included is really important to me as well. Yeah,
I mean, you're obviously doing many things right. And I was thinking about who might be tuning in and listening. And I thought, if I was a young winemaker, I'd tune in and I'd want a tip, some kind of tip from Sarah Crowe. What's she doing right? And what can I get out of this podcast? So that's where that kind of question came from, but beautifully answered. What is the most rewarding part of your role, and what keeps you doing what you do every day?
Well, I love the diversity in a day and throughout the year, and but also being connected to nature at the same time. So even though we're working I'm working in the winery most of the year, it's still this kind of organic living product that has come from the earth that we're working with. So that's a really beautiful thing that helps me get out of bed in the morning. And I guess the challenging years are the years where we kind of seem to learn and grow as winemakers the most. Even though I'd take a beautiful, easy vintage any year, they're not going to come every year. So, yeah, they're the ones where we kind of expand a little bit and reach out to, our network of friends in the industry and say, hey, have you seen this before? What would you do? What's been your experience? They help. Those challenging years definitely help keep us connected.
And the wine industry, for the main part, is a big community, and I imagine that that's so important. And like I said, staying connected to the Hunter Valley, which has had such a big impact on your life. How do you stay connected to that community, even in COVID times where you can't travel?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because we were so used to running into each other at seminars or wine shows, trade shows. I guess wine shows are a big part of that network, or had been a big part of maintaining that network, but also growing that network. It was a bit harder, and I didn't mind. I actually quite enjoyed staying a bit closer to home for a change and not travelling quite so much. There was elements of lockdown I didn't mind, but I did miss seeing people face to face. But I had some friends who we would have regular Zoom catch ups and some working groups and things that I sit on, particularly for the Lynn tutorial. We were having monthly working group Zoom meetings, and so it just kind of happened by us just trying to kind of keep the momentum going, that we would just catch up. But it was less. It was definitely less.
Well, let's hope that we're seeing a lot more of the wine shows continue, and you do your fair share of wine judging around the country, that's for sure. So I hope that those can continue forward so that you do get that opportunity to catch up and have a drink with your fellow colleagues. What's on the next agenda? What's happening for you in the next couple of years? Any goals that you'd like to share with us?
No kind of big goals. Look, we've got a few new varieties that we've sprinkled across the vineyard here. So seeing how they perform, it's such a long game, this one. By the time you plant something and get through that first couple of awkward vintages where it's a bit of a gangly teenager, I suppose, where the vines start to settle in, that's a 5 or 6 year turnaround. So there's a few little things to play with and keep us excited. But apart from that, I think just trying to make sure that we're respecting the history and the legacy here and continue to make, particularly the dry red wine number 1 and dry red wine number 2, the best examples they can be of beautiful, cool climate Yarra Valley wines that also respect the history and show the vineyard. That's all I want to do.
Business as usual, but the best kind of business.
Yeah, that's right.
Sarah, I always ask everyone on the podcast, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, alcoholic or not, doesn't really matter, what would they be and why? Look,
I would have to say I love starting the day with a good cup of tea, and sometimes finishing the day with a good cup of tea. So I could probably, even though I love coffee, I could live without that more than I could tea, I reckon. So tea has to be one of them. Then it's probably just I would drink more Chardonnay than any other variety. So Chardonnay definitely has to be there. And just to balance things out, I need a red as well. So I'm going to say Pinot Noir.
Perfect. I knew Chardonnay would be on your list, but I was curious at the others. And is it English breakfast tea, milk, no milk?
Look, I've lived through all kinds of, I have stages to really work it out. But at the moment, I'm largely English breakfast with milk.
No sugar?
No sugar. Yeah.
Yep. I feel you with that. A good cup of tea, just the right temperature, you've got to get it in that sweet spot.
I know. And then you don't want to and it's only loose leaf for me. I'm a real tea snob. So it has to be a loose leaf in a pot. None of that tea dust in a bag.
I think the wine shows need to take a little note of that we only want loose leaf tea for all judging from now on.
That's right. Yeah, we all want our own little teapot.
Perfect. Sarah, it's such an honour to have you on the podcast. I really can't wait. Hopefully we'll be tasting wine again soon, perhaps at another show. But I know it's so busy for you. So thank you for your time. Best of luck with the rest of harvest. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a total honour.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's been really lovely to chat.
Thank you, Sarah. Cheers to you. This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.